We saw this earlier this month when President Xi repeated his pledge to make the Chinese military, and I quote, "a great wall of steel that effectively safeguards national sovereignty, security, and development interests," end of quote. We saw it with Beijing's Global Security Initiative, which it seeks to embed in UN documents and international discourse more widely. We can expect to see a greater focus on security, whether military, tech, or economic. All companies in China, for example, are already obliged by law to assist state intelligence gathering operations and to keep it secret. We can also expect even stricter economic control measures as part of a strengthening of the Chinese Communist Party's steering of the economy through its institutions and leaders. And we can expect to see a clear path and push to make China less dependent on the world and the world more dependent on China. Or as President Xi put it bluntly a few years ago, and I quote, "China must tighten international production chains' dependence on China to form a powerful countermeasure and deterrent capability," end of quote. This is especially true when it comes to critical raw materials like lithium or cobalt, for sectors like high-speed rail and renewable energy technology, or for emerging tech that is central to future economic and national security, like quantum computing or robotics and artificial intelligence. The second conclusion we can draw flows from this, and that is that the imperative for security and control now trumps the logic of free markets and open trade. In his report to the recent Party Congress, President Xi told the Chinese people to prepare for struggle. And it is no coincidence that he used in his opening speech the words "dozhen" and "fendo" repeatedly, which both can be translated as struggle. This is indicative of a worldview shaped by a sense of mission for the Chinese nation, which brings me to the third conclusion. And that is that the Chinese Communist Party's clear goal is a systemic change of the international order with China at its center. We have seen it with China's positions in multilateral bodies, which show its determination to promote an alternative vision of the world order, one where individual rights are subordinated to national security, where security and economy take prominence over political and civil rights. We've seen it with the Belt and Road Initiative, new international banks, or other China-led institutions set up to rival the current international system. We've seen it with China's set of global initiatives and by how it positions itself as a power and peace broker, for instance, through the recent Saudi Arabia and Iran agreement. And we have seen the show of friendship in Moscow, which says 1,000 words about this new vision for an international order. Ladies and gentlemen, with all this in mind, our response must start by working to strengthening the international system itself. We want to work with our partners on global issues like trade, finance, climate, sustainable development, or health. For that, we need to reinforce the institutions and systems in which countries can compete and cooperate and from which they benefit. This is why it is vitally important that we ensure diplomatic stability and open communication with China. I believe it is neither viable nor in Europe's interest to decouple from China. Our relations are not black or white, and our response cannot be either. And this is why we need to focus on de-risk, not decouple. And this is part of the reason why I will soon be visiting Beijing together with President Macron. Managing this relationship and having an open and frank exchange with our Chinese counterparts is a key part of what I would call the de-risking through diplomacy of our relations with China. We will never be shy in raising the deeply concerning issues I've already set out. But I believe we must leave space for discussion on a more ambitious partnership and on how we can make competition fairer and more disciplined. And more broadly, we need to think about how we can work together productively, the global system in the future, and on which challenges. There are some islands of opportunity that we can build on. Take climate change and nature protection. I very much welcome the leading role China played in securing the historic Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Agreement. And a few weeks ago, China was also an active player in the global deal to protect biodiversity in international waters. At a time of global conflict and tensions, these are notable diplomatic achievements which China and the European Union worked on together. And we look forward to working together in the same spirit ahead of COP28 later this year. And this shows what can be done when interests align. And it shows that diplomacy can still work, whether on pandemic preparedness, nuclear non-proliferation, or global financial stability. The point here is that we do not want to cut economic, societal, political, or scientific ties. China is a vital trading partner, accounting for 9% of our goods exports and more than 20% of our goods imports. While imbalances are growing, most of our trade in goods and services remains mutual beneficial and unrisky. But our relationship is unbalanced and increasingly affected by distortions created by China's state capitalist system. So we need to rebalance this relationship on the basis of transparency, predictability, and reciprocity. We have to ensure that our trade and investment relations promote prosperity in China and in the European Union. The Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, the so-called CAI, for which negotiations concluded in 2020, aimed at such rebalancing. But we have to recognize that the world and China have changed significantly in the last 3 years. And we need to reassess the CAI in light of our wider China strategy. And we know there are some areas where trade and investment poses risks to our economic and national security, particularly in the context of China's explicit fusion of its military and commercial sectors. This is true for certain sensitive technologies, dual-use goods, or even investment which comes with forced technology or knowledge transfers. This is why, after de-risking through diplomacy, the second strand of our future China strategy must be economic de-risking. The starting point for this is having a clear-eyed picture on what the risks are. That means recognizing how China's economic and security ambitions have shifted. But it also means taking a critical look at our own resilience and dependencies, in particular within our industrial and defense space. This can only be based on stress testing our relationship to see where the greatest threats lie concerning our resilience, long-term prosperity and security. And this will allow us to develop our economic de-risking strategy across 4 pillars. The first one is making our own economy and industry more competitive and resilient. This is particularly the case when it comes to health, digital, and the clean tech sector. If you look at the global market for net zero technologies, it is set to triple by 2030. Triple. Our ability to remain front runners in this sector will shape our economy for the decades to come. And this is why, you all know it, just last week we put forward the Net Zero Industry Act as a key part of our Green Deal industrial plan. The aim is to be able to produce at least 40% of the clean tech that we need for the green transition, such as solar, onshore and offshore wind, renewable energy in the broadest sense, batteries and storage, heat pumps and grid technologies. But to achieve this goal, we will also need more independence and diversity when it comes to the key inputs needed for our competitiveness. We know this is an era where we rely on one single supplier, China, for 98% of our rare earth supply, 93% of our magnesium, 97% of our lithium, just to name a few. We are deeply mindful of what happened with Japan's imports of rare earths from China a decade ago, when foreign policy tensions between the two in the East China Sea became acute. Our demand for these materials will skyrocket as the digital and the green transition speed up. Batteries that are powering our electric vehicles are forecasted to drive up demand for lithium by 17 times by 2050. This is why we have put forward the Critical Raw Materials Act to help diversify and secure our supply. And we need to think about this right across our single market to strengthen our resilience on cyber and maritime, space and digital, defense and innovation. The second part of this de-risking strategy is better using our existing toolbox of trade instruments. Over the past years, we've put in place measures to address security concerns, whether on 5G, the foreign direct investment, or export controls. We have given ourselves the tools to counter economic distortions, notably through the foreign subsidies regulation, as well as the new instrument to deter economic coercion. We now need the unity at EU level for bolder and faster use of those instruments when they are required, and a more assertive approach to enforcement. My third point. China's changing policies may require us to develop new defensive tools for some critical sectors. The European Union needs to define its future relationship with China and other countries in sensitive, high-tech areas, such as microelectronics, quantum computing, robotics, artificial intelligence, biotech, you name it. Where dual-use purposes cannot be excluded or human rights might be implicated, there will need to be a clear line on whether investments or exports are in our own security interest. We need to ensure that our companies' capital, expertise, and knowledge are not used to enhance the military and intelligence capabilities of those who are also systemic rivals. So we have to look at where there are gaps in our toolbox which allow the leakage of emerging and sensitive technologies through investments in other countries. And this is why we're currently reflecting on if and how Europe should develop a targeted instrument on outbound investment. This would relate to a small number of sensitive technologies where investment can lead to the development of military capabilities that pose risks to national security. The Commission will present some initial ideas as part of our new economic security strategy later this year. This will map out where we need to strengthen our economic security and how to better use our trade and tax security tools. The fourth part of our economic de-risking strategy is alignment with other partners. On issues that concern our economic security, we have much in common with our partners around the world. This is especially true to our G7 and G20 partners, and those in the region and beyond who are often more integrated with China and more advanced in their thinking on de-risking. As part of this, we will focus on free trade agreements where we do not yet have them, such as with New Zealand, Australia, India, our ASEAN and Mercosur partners, on modernizing agreements where we have them, such as Mexico and Chile, and on better using the others that already exist. We will enhance cooperation on sectors such as digital and clean tech through the Trade and Technology Council with India or the EU-Japan Green Alliance. And we will invest in infrastructure in the region and beyond through the Global Gateway Strategy. We are offering developing countries a genuine choice when it comes to infrastructure investment and finance. And all of this will help strengthen our supply chain resilience and diversify our trade, which must be a central element of our economic de-risking strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, we have in front of us a task to refocus on the most important issues. And it is a reflection of the need to adjust our strategy in line with the way the Chinese Communist Party seems to be changing. But if we are to manage this relationship, to prepare for the future, we must do it together. At this defining moment in global affairs, we need the collective will to respond together A strong European-China policy relies on strong coordination between member states and EU institutions, and a willingness to avoid the divide and conquer tactics that we know we may face. But I also want to say that nothing is inevitable in geopolitics. China is fascinating and a complex mix of history, progress, and challenges. And it will define this century. But our story about how we relate to China is not yet fully written. And it need not be a defensive one. We must collectively show that our democratic system, our values, and our open economy can deliver on prosperity and security for people. And at the same time, we must always be ready to talk and work with those who see the world differently, Which brings me back to where I started, and about working to gradually change minds and action. This is what you do. This is what you do every single day in your work. And this is what Europe will always. Many thanks for your attention. Thank you. Dankeschön.